Last Saturday night, I was driving back home from a camping trip. Instead of taking the main road, I decided to take a shortcut through the mountains. It was supposed to shave 2 hours off my trip. The rural route might have been fine during the day, but I didn't know the way, and the lack of streetlights through the wilderness made for a white-knuckle experience. One thing that never fails is that in godforsaken remote places like that, there's little cell service and even less GPS reliability. As my car wound around sharp curves and the narrow 2-lane blacktop, I cursed my decision to become Christopher Columbus. The GPS on my phone was rerouting continually, and I had to hope there were no more turns I needed to make until it got its bearings again. Roadkill was a frequent occurrence along the way, as I drove for miles without even passing another car or residence. It was just dense trees on either side of a lonely highway. I began to wonder if the road would ever straighten out. If there was any good to come from the nerve-wracking experience, it was that it was impossible to fall asleep with so many corkscrew twists and turns. The GPS on my phone was so lost that I eventually fumbled around in the dark to shut the damn thing off. I guess I should have pulled onto the shoulder, but I thought I could multitask. Just as I had nearly found the off button on the side, I looked up to see something large in the middle of my lane. As a reflex, I darted to the opposite side of the road, but it had the same idea. The thud was both sobering and ugly. I screeched my brakes at least 3 seconds too late to avoid the collision. It was just a delayed reaction to an unlikely event. Besides the pulse-pounding rush of hitting a massive white animal in the middle of nowhere, in the dark, there was also the matter of its shocking appearance. Its gnarled horns shattered my windshield on impact, and blood and fur were streaked on the side of the car. The creature itself was gone by the time I'd pulled over to check on it, but that wasn't the unbelievable part. I swear to you, it was crossing the road on its hind legs. I couldn't begin to tell you what it was, but it was not a buck. I only had a 2 or 3 second glance at the creepy thing, but I know a deer when I see one, and this was not a deer. If I live to be 100, I'll never forget it. The solid white thing I hit was some sort of upright goat-looking beast. It had reverse knees and hooves of a regular goat, and a long, narrow head with wide-set eyes. It also had upturned ears and a traditional goatee dangling from its chin, like a regular billy goat, but it also had a humanoid-like torso. It evoked images of Eliphas Levi's satanic Baphomet illustration. The mere thought of such a sinister thing like that being so nearby was terrifying. The most distinctive feature of the grotesque creature, however, were its ghastly eyes. I initially assumed they glowed from the radiance of my blaring headlights, but now I'm not so sure they weren't fiery red all the time. For the split second our eyes made contact, they pierced right through me. There wasn't as much fear in them over the imminent collision of my advancing Tesla, as there was a furious display of malice directed squarely at me. It bared its fangs until the impact. The whole thing shook me up so much that I crept down the rest of the mountain at quarter speed. I wasn't taking any more chances with phantom wildlife. Frankly, I felt lucky to be alive, and I was anxious to put as much distance between myself and that thing as possible. Pulling into my driveway was a huge relief, but honestly, I only slept fitfully. Over and over, I replayed that chilling incident in my head. What was that hideous thing in the woods? I tried to convince myself I'd hallucinated the whole thing, but the considerable damage to my car was undeniable. The dents and shattered windshield wouldn't allow me to dismiss any unwanted encounter. The next day I called my insurance company to report the white deer accident so I could get it repaired. Naturally, there was a complication. Without an incident report by the state police, they would only consider paying my claim with an official inspection by an adjuster. I guess they had too many bogus claims to just take my word for it. Also, they probably wanted to verify it wasn't an alcohol-related hit and run of a human being. Of that much I was certain. I'd had a few beers on the camping trip, but I knew my sobriety wasn't an issue. Regardless, the officer who accompanied the insurance adjuster requested permission to draw a blood sample. All of a sudden, it went from a simple insurance claim to an official investigation. I permitted the blood test to clear me and alleviate any suspicions, but the whole thing made me pretty nervous. Obviously, I didn't tell them certain details about the horned thing I saw the previous night, walking on its hind legs. Either that, or that it had haunting, blood-red eyes. Even suggesting that I'd hit an albino deer caused a serious level of doubt. The other unbelievable details would surely result in a loss of credibility on my part, and legal action, and or incarceration. I doubled down on the albino deer lie. There were traces of blood, skin, and clumps of white fur embedded in the twisted dents and damaged undercarriage. Initially, that helped my case, along with the fact that my car was whisper quiet and wouldn't give an animal as much advance warning. They even found a small piece of the animal's horn on my back floorboard. I guess the impact threw it through the shattered glass. The two men collected samples and put them in specimen bags for analysis. I hoped that would be enough to satisfy their investigation, but they looked like they were very thorough. I knew that DNA sequencing would disprove it as a deer. The question was, what would it reveal? Several days went by. I avoided calling because I didn't want to appear too anxious, but eventually I wanted my car repaired and the matter resolved. Finally, I couldn't stand it anymore. I broke down and called the claims number. The automated system said my claim was pending. That wasn't much help. I elected to give them a few more days. Finally, the adjuster called me. I could tell he spent a great deal of time trying to phrase things in the most advantageous way.
We've ran those samples through the state analysis lab. There were some big irregularities. They've informed us that the animal you hit was not a deer. They think it was some sort of wild mutant goat.
I had several days to anticipate that response and immediately went into my planned reply. Really? Well, as I said, it was very dark, and the darn thing darted in front of me before I could even hit the brake. Whether it was a deer or any other wild animal, it should still be covered by my policy, right? I'd hate to think there was some sort of mutant goat exclusion clause.
Oh, we're going to fix your car. Don't worry about that. I've already authorized the repair, but the state police have more questions for you. The lab tech who researched the samples for us told me the wild goat thing has highly unusual DNA and serious mutations. The authorities want to locate it for scientific study. You mentioned that despite the serious impact with your vehicle, it ran off afterward? Is that correct? Is there anything else you can offer?
I just sat there, unsure of what to say. Could I level with the guy? Would he believe me if I did? It seemed unlikely, since I probably wouldn't believed it myself. He finally spoke up.
Are you still on the line?
After a long period of uncomfortable silence, I assured him I was there. I had just successfully convinced him to fix the damage to my car. There was nothing to gain by confessing now. I was torn between playing it safe and unburdening myself. I was so freaked out by witnessing that creepy ghoul that I really needed to tell someone else. As it turned out, the police wanted me to accompany them back to the accident scene. It was one thing to spill my guts about some supernatural goat man lurking in the woods. It was quite another to go back to that desolate place myself and tempt fate a second time. Worse still, the insurance guy let it slip that there had been a number of mysterious disappearances in that general area. The state police were hoping to find out if there was a potential connection. Considering how remote that godforsaken wilderness area was, it was hard to imagine it not being involved. I told him I'd think about it, but there was obviously a misunderstanding. A state investigator showed up at my front door the next morning, expecting me to go with him. He didn't look like the type to take no for an answer, so I grabbed my things and got in his government-issued undercover car. The area looked a lot less menacing in the daytime, but I still didn't want to be there. Pinpointing the exact spot was hard. There were no mile markers or recognizable landmarks to distinguish one section from the other. Several times I thought we were at the right spot, but upon closer inspection, I had to admit that we were not. The officer I was with couldn't exactly be described as patient. Every time I misspoke, Dave became a little more gruff. Apologizing for being wrong just seemed to make him that much more tense and agitated. He definitely needed to learn how to relax. Finally, A curved section of the road looked very familiar. There were skid marks and some recent accident debris. I was pretty sure it was where I'd hit that grotesque beast, but with so many false stops, I was hesitant to commit on this one. "Is this it or not?" he grumbled. "I think so. Look, there in the ditch. I believe that's my mirror. Yes. What are the chances of there being another Tesla mirror in the ditch around here? This is definitely the place I hit the, wild animal." We pulled off the road and into a nearby flattened thicket. Honestly, we could have parked in the middle of the highway with so little traffic passing by. In the entire time we entered the wilderness area, only one other vehicle passed us by. I was hesitant to get out of the car, but I couldn't exactly explain my reasons to Officer Motivated. Tracking a wild albino goat seemed safe enough. Tracking a standing goat-headed demon who was angry at me for hitting it with my car, not so much. "There's something I need to tell you," I offered. He looked at me with steely blue eyes. "The thing is, big. It doesn't look like anything I've ever seen before. I don't think it was natural. It was walking upright when I hit it." I half expected the guy to react angrily, or to burst out laughing at my unbelievable revelation. Oddly, he did neither. He stopped his cautious progress through the dense brush and turned to make full eye contact with me. "I know. I've seen it before. When I was on patrol duty a few years ago, I saw it at the edge of the tree line. It tried to hide, but my searchlight on the patrol car caught it in a beam for at least 10 seconds. I've been stalking that godforsaken thing ever since. There have been a half a dozen people who've disappeared in this section of woods. They have never been found. I don't know what that monster is or what it did to those poor people, but I'm betting it's still allergic to hot lead. It bled plenty from that impact with your fancy electric car. I'm going to take it down." I was stunned. Not only did he believe me, he had seen it too. As a matter of fact, he was on some sort of obsessed mission to kill it. I might have been more impressed if I wasn't marching into the woods with him, unarmed. He sensed my hesitation and tossed me a pistol. I can't say it made me feel any better. "Trust me, that thing will haunt your dreams and your waking hours until we end it. If you'd admitted the truth to anyone, they would have teased you about it mercilessly. I know. I'm still the butt of chupacabra jokes to this day in my department. Finally, I had to just stop talking about it to anyone else. They were never going to believe it unless they'd seen it themselves. I reached out to various insurance companies to be informed of any accidents in this forest area. As soon as I saw your report, I knew you'd seen it too. You were smart to lie about it being an albino deer." 1,000 thoughts rolled around in my head. This guy had been planning his mission for years. He couldn't confide in anyone else or trust them to help. I was it. I barely knew which end of a gun to point and which end to hold. Officer Dave apparently didn't care. He just wanted to have someone to join in the hunt who believed him. Obviously I did, but I entered this little crusade under involuntary circumstances. One thing was for sure, there was no backing out now. "Do you know how to handle a firearm?" he quizzed. There was a marked hint of skepticism in his tone. I guess he'd already summed me up, but was hoping for a yes. My expression surely answered his question. He barked like a commando. "There is no safety. It is loaded. Keep your damn finger off the booger switch until it's time to fire." Realizing something was lost in translation, he rephrased, "I repeat, keep your finger off the trigger. Is that clear?" I nodded while removing my finger from the cold reassurance of the so-called booger switch. We traipsed through the dense foliage and trees for hours. I could hardly believe I was on some suicidal mission to locate and shoot Chupacabra with tightly wound Officer Dave. He was fully committed. I less so. But there was a false sense of security in backing up a man who did what needed to be done. I had great trust in him, and hoped I could offer him some positive level of support. Unfortunately, I wasn't dressed for stalking a 7-foot mythical creature with glowing red eyes and 2-inch long fangs. There were gnats and ticks, There were snakes hidden in the dense leaf bed, but all that was the least of my worries. I was tired, thirsty, and the sun was getting low on the horizon. Whatever level of courage or brave put-on I was faking would surely erode with the sunset. Dave and I quickened our pace. We were trying to find its lair while it slept. We stood to lose the strategic advantage of surprise once it awoke. I didn't want to, but it had to be said. Dave, we need to turn back. This is its home turf. We are ill-prepared to fight this thing in the dark. Why don't we come back with some reinforcements? Maybe a few more people, and a tracking dog. I sensed the onset of fierce resistance from his body language, but he knew I was right. We needed to get back to the car. I don't mind telling you, once the sun starts going down, it sets quickly, and then darkness descends. The return trail back was marked with clear evidence of our ragtag expedition into the woods. The leaves were disturbed and the tree limbs were bent or broken off haphazardly. Night fell upon us before we reached the car. I was pretty nervous, but at least I wasn't alone. Dave's posture was that of disappointment and defeat. As a man who comes prepared for nearly anything, he had 2 flashlights and some survival gear. I let him lead the way. It was harder to retrace our path in the dark. Meanwhile, I kept a close watch on our flanks. Every shuffle of our feet rustled leaves and snapped twigs. We weren't escaping the detection of anything. At last, the clearing came into view. I could see long streaks of moonlight shining upon the open roadway. I couldn't articulate how relieved I was to escape the unforgiving deep forest canopy. That is, until I saw Officer Dave's mangled Crown Vic. It had been destroyed. The windows were shattered, the sides of the vehicles were dented and scraped up. Infinitely worse, one of the tires was punctured with a large hole. If there was any doubt whatsoever about the identity of the culprit, there were hoof prints surrounding the car on all sides. The whole time we were searching for this evil thing, it was watching us. "Come on, let's get the tire changed and get the hell out of here," I hissed. "We've got to hurry before it comes back." I looked over at Dave. It was as if he hadn't even heard me. He was lost deep in thought. I assumed it was just extreme reluctance to leave the job undone, but I was wrong about that. He had apparently heard something which drew his attention. I started to repeat myself again, but he silenced me with his finger up to his lips. Before I knew it, he drew his service weapon and pointed it at the trunk. The light bulb went off. I finally understood. Officer Dave believed we were about to be ambushed as we went to retrieve the spare tire. I raised my gun and pointed it to the other side in support. It was brilliant. How did this thing know what we would do? It clearly understood human behavior. Dave silently mouthed the words, "gas tank," as he motioned for both of us to back away to a safe distance. If there was any doubt about his suspicion, it was extinguished quickly. The trunk began to shake violently from the inside. It must have realized what we were about to do. Dave fired at the trunk in rapid succession. His first 4 rounds pierced the huge compartment. I followed suit with the gun he gave me. My first 2 missed the car entirely, but my 3rd shot hit the side in an area very near the bullseye. I think one of us definitely struck the beast because it began to bray and squeal. He was clearly a seasoned marksman with close groupings. My shots were all over the place, but there was something to be said about spreading the rounds around, especially when you're attempting to take out a chupacabra hiding out in the trunk of a Crown Victoria. Officer Dave might have won the blue ribbon shooting match for his overall accuracy, but I definitely took home the unofficial grand prize. One of my errant bullets struck the fuel tank, which roasted the entire car in a Hollywood blockbuster-style explosion. Despite firing a bevy of live rounds into the back end of an automobile, neither of us expected a blast of that intensity. The saboteur certainly wasn't going to be getting out of the trunk after that. I think Dave was a little annoyed, though. He had some serious explaining to do for losing his government-issued vehicle. And also the proof he'd sought for so long was basically charred into barbecue. We had a long walk back to civilization. It was at least 7 miles before we could get a phone signal. Dave seems like a good guy. We talked a bit. He and I are going fishing next Saturday. But we won't be taking any rural shortcuts coming back home.